Good morning, everyone. I gather that the conference has been going very well, so the pressure is on me to make sure that I continue that trend. I do hope that this presentation today is useful for you, but certainly it is very exciting for me to have the invitation to come join you. This is certainly an area of passion for me in terms of the topic of innovation, but also the application of innovation to the domain of education. So I'm going to talk to you about this idea of innovation, what it is, what I have been studying in terms of the different types of organizations I've been working with over the last, say, 10 years, and trying to understand why are some of them better able to adapt to change through innovation than others. And then I will talk a little bit about what I think this means for the space of education and perhaps share some examples, some of which are the things we were experimenting with at the Melbourne Business School as well. But before I jump into that, I'd like to just ask you to reflect upon something for a moment. The theme, courage and commitment, I think is a very sound one, especially in the space of sort of thinking about innovation. But I want to think about this issue of commitment, because commitment carries with it some notion of time, right? You're committed to things over long periods of time. I want you to think about, what do you think the organization you're currently working in, what do you think they will look like 30 years from now? 30. Now, many of you are going, don't care because I won't be there. Okay, but we're talking about commitment. 30 years from now, what do you think your organization will look like? What will it be doing? Where will it be located? Will it have a location? Think about the people who are going to be leading. Who's going to have your job? What will they look like? What will their path have come from? Think about that for a second. Think, when you join an organization, if you thought about a good career is 30 years. You come into an organization, you leave 30 years later, you like to think that it's better than when you came, or at least as good. Maybe not worse, that'd be nice. All right, think about that. As you think about that, I want to show you a video, and we'll reflect on that.
When I move this stuff.
Question time!
So what is that?
It's a typewriter.
Why do you know what it is?
Because I know a lot of antique stuff.
I just see it in movies and TV shows.
Like old movies?
I've seen it in a movie.
Somebody in my family still has one.
So what does a typewriter do?
Type.
It's a computer. Well, no, it's not a computer.
I'm pretty sure it's just typing.
It types and it prints at the same time.
It is basically like a computer, all except it doesn't have a screen. All you do is type out messages.
How does it work?
I actually really don't know.
Let's explore. I think you put a piece of paper in there and then or does it provide paper? I don't know. And then you click that and then it stamps it on.
And it types like that, but then, here, I'll just try to get to the end. And then, this is fun.
On a computer, you can just type into a program and it will show up. But for this, you need paper. So where's the paper?
I don't know. Somewhere.
Well, I think it's the stringy thingy over here. Do I have to, scroll this up or?
We actually need to give you paper.
Okay, then I wasn't sure about that. Can I write my name?
You can, once we get you the paper. How do you load the paper?
Huh?
What? In here?
Do you put it right here or right here?
Uh-oh. I think I just broke it.
Good at this.
Theo? How did I do this? Okay, I'm in trouble. Let's try this again. Can you help me, Hugh?
Okay, we'll show you how it works.
Okay.
So this?
So why do I show you that video? Because it's hilarious. But also, those are the people that are going to be leading your organization 30 years from now. That's what that is. And I reflected upon this when I first saw it because I thought about when I applied to college. And I remember doing my application on a typewriter and very carefully going through it and, making sure my mother, standing over me, don't make any mistakes. And, of course, I had the whiteout right there. Remember that? And I thought how when I started high school, my mother told me my very first year of high school, she said, Ian, I want you to take typing as an elective because things get hard, you never know, you'll always find a job as a typist. So I dutifully did what my mother suggested, and I took typing as my first class, and I was able to type. And I thought about all those activities, and I thought, none of those things would I tell my children. They're completely useless for them, and this is irrelevant for them, and they will have to have a completely different set of skills, right? And it really crystallizes to me how quickly things can dramatically change, right? Things that we just take for granted are irrelevant. And then something that we never even thought about, you know, the idea that I might somehow submit my application to college online and with some people I mean, none of this was even conceivable at that point in time, yet that is just the way I do my work every day now. That's the type of change your organization is going to go through. What does that look like 30 years from now? Don't know. How do we create the routines, the activities, the leadership skill sets in our organization such that it doesn't matter? That's the question I'm very interested in. And I'm interested in that question because I actually know it's very difficult for organizations to do this effectively. That in fact, most organizations cannot. 30 years is very difficult for them to survive at all. And I'll give you, I'm a business professor, so a lot of the things that I study are businesses, but I study organizations, and that includes educational institutions as well. But I'll give you some data from business organizations that I think crystallizes this fact for me. I was having a conversation with a student one day, and I said it's very difficult for companies to be successful for long periods of time. And my student argued with me, and they said, no, that's not true. There's a lot of very successful organizations that have been around for a long time. And I said, well, you know, a lot actually is a technical term. What is that number, right? And my student said, well, it's plenty. And I said, well, listen, I want you to go and look at the Fortune 500 list. This is the list of the best, largest companies on the planet. I want you to look at that list in 1982, and I want you to look at that list in 2012, 30 years. It's a good career. And I want you to see how many of them are still on that list that were started in 82 are still on in 2012. So the student went away gleefully thinking, yeah, this is a great chance for me to prove the teacher wrong. Everybody loves that opportunity. The answer was interesting. 21%. Only 21% of those companies that were listed as the greatest companies on the planet in 82 were still on that same list 30 years later. The number was even smaller than I thought it'd be. And what's even more amazing about that, you know, the 79% that are gone, many of them literally are gone. They're like no longer in existence. They went from being one of the best, most well-established, successful organizations on the planet to not being in operation 30 years later. And the organizations that replaced them, many of them did not exist 30 years later, before. And what it just shows me is how volatile things are, and even in situations where we're very confident that it will be that way. You know, I can give you plenty of examples. It's in this audience, you know, you're of a similar demography as me in terms of age. So if I start doing this and I say Polaroid, everybody knows what I'm doing, right? You know what that is? Yeah, my kids have no idea what that is. No idea. Polaroid and Kodak have no meaning to them unless we're talking like Kodak as in like a bear or something like that. They have no concept of this, nor should they. It's irrelevant to them. Yet these were two dynamic organizations, both of which were highlighted in business schools as the epitome of innovation, both of which fell prey to a technological disruption that they saw coming and tried to prepare for. Many of you were very proud when you got your first Motorola phone. Yes, remember that? If I do this and I talk about phone, you know what I'm talking about. My kids, no idea. If I do this, they know what that is. But flipping something doesn't mean anything to them, right? Motorola was a dynamic organization at the edge of leading at the edge of a breakthrough technology, and also was known for dynamic, innovative management practices. This was a great company. Not so relevant. Motorola has been sold twice in the last 5 years. It is now owned by Lenovo. They actually came out with a phone recently. Does anybody have one? Show your hands. Anybody? Nobody? Yes. That tells you a lot, doesn't it? Many of you were very proud when you traded in your Motorola for a Nokia. And if this was 10 years before and I was talking about innovation, I might highlight this fantastic Finnish organization Of course, a year and a half ago, Nokia's mobile phone division was sold to Microsoft. Microsoft immediately laid off 14,000 people from that division. The organization is a third of the size that it was, and they're really trying to grapple with who they will be, because they just never really got onto the fact that people wanted something other than a phone, that was actually just a function of this device, and it really was not even the most important function. Many of you had a Blockbuster membership. And everybody knows the torture of running to Blockbuster at 8:59 to try to get that DVD in before you get hit with the late penalty. My children will never know that joy, nor should they, because Blockbuster is no longer in business. Blockbuster has 60,000 employees across the world. This was a leading industry in technological disruption. Many of you have Netflix. Yes, it's amazing. Many of you have Sony devices. And why would I put Sony up there? They're still in existence. Yeah, almost. Sony lost $1.5 billion last year. Sony's had 5 CEOs in like the last 8 to 9 years. People are talking about rating their debt as junk bond status. It is not clear that Sony will be around. They are struggling. Take away PlayStation, and it's not certain what they're really good at. And you know, this really speaks to this issue, right? Let's go back. Think about this. So 2001, the iPod came out. Did anybody stand in line for our iPod? No. Some of you stood in line for an iPhone, though. That's interesting. But when 2001 came around and the iPod came out, Apple was actually not a good company. Hard to believe. Was not seen as a leading organization. And let's think about this. So if we at that time listened to our music while we walked or worked out, I guarantee you we listened to it on a Walkman or a Discman. And if we didn't have a Walkman or a Discman, whatever we had, we referred to it as such. Right? Because it was the aspirational thing for it to be. So Sony had the #1 share in the market for mobile music devices. Remember when the iTunes store came out, everybody was complaining about all these lawsuits with the record companies, with content and all this other stuff? Sony owned one of the largest record labels on the planet. And Sony had MP3 technology. So if anybody was going to do this, it should have been them. But they did not, because that was a recessionary period at that time in the United States. And they said, oh, we're going to be cautious. We don't want to sabotage these great products we already have. Well, Apple's saying, if we don't have a hit, we're going under. So let's just throw it out there and see what happens. Fast forward. I would bet that not many of you ever bought a Sony MP3 player. If you had an iPod, what do you think the odds are that you also bought an iPhone? Interesting. How many of you have a Sony phone? Not a lot of hands. Very interesting. We're not talking about a lot of time here. When the change comes, it comes quickly, and it completely changes the game. You do not have to wait very long. And you might go, this is interesting, Ian. Why are you telling me about MP3 players and Blockbuster and all that? What does that have to do with education? When the change comes, it comes quickly. So these are just 2 articles I was reading recently. Both of them came out in the last year. We are ground zero for disruption. And certainly higher education is front and center on this, whether that be the notion of globalization, whether that be the notion of online education. We have been very effective at developing, you hear people say this, places of learning, environments of learning. And what is not clear to me is whether or not my children will ever go to a place to learn. And that really fundamentally changes how we think about education. And you know, it's not just higher education. So let's think about what's going on in K through 12. Very interesting phenomenon. So Melbourne, which is where I live, has experienced tremendous demographic change over the last 5 years, and that has caused stress and strain on the urban planning system. We don't have enough schools in the right places. And so you have the Department of Education, which is focusing on that, and obviously the government and the like. And I saw something that was very interesting. So there's a community called Port Melbourne in Melbourne. Many of you may have been there. They need a school. And these 2 teachers decided to leave the schools they were at, and they're going to form a school. And they said, well, where are we going to get the money from? Well, normally, who funds schools? Government and religious organizations in Australia primarily. They say, well, we don't want either one of you. We're going to raise the money ourselves. We're going to crowdsource it. And they did. And the school opens in 2016.